Her husband had just died, and she said, like, I don't know if I have any more purpose in life, right? Like, my husband passed away, but yet something is telling me that there's something still left for me to contribute. Like, so you're starting this New Canadian Friendship Center. Is there any way I can serve? Right? She said, and I said, by all means, like, you will be loved here. A lot of them, these families have left their grandma and grandpas, and they've come. And so you will be their Canadian grandma. If you were to come, they would love you. And I just saw this person sitting in our cafe and just loved by all these kids and the influence and the impact that she has had, right? She became one of our strongest volunteers who served and had such a powerful impact, on many non-Christian families. And she's like, and then even when we used to talk about it, and she always remembered that conversation, how hesitant she was at first, and then she took that step of faith outside of her comfort zone, saw God at work.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sowers Podcast. My name is Matt Naismith, and I am your host. On this podcast, we share stories from church planters and leaders who are influencing kingdom movement and impacting their communities. Whether you're a church planter, a pastor in a church, part of a church planting team, or just curious to learn more, our hope is that these conversations inspire you to be a sower in the places where you live, work, learn, and play. If this podcast blesses you, we'd love for you to share episodes and subscribe on your preferred platform. Now, let's dive into our next conversation. Welcome, friends, to the Sowers Podcast. Thanks for joining us for this episode and this conversation. I hope you are having a fantastic day. Well, if you're not following us on Spotify, Apple Music, and YouTube, want to invite you to go ahead and to do that. Just hit subscribe or follow, and you'll get updated every week when a new episode is released. Also, I would love to hear stories from you about how this podcast is equipping and inspiring you to become a sower of the gospel in the places where you live, work, learn, and play. You can engage with us with those stories on social media, or you can email ask@thesowerspod with a story of, once again, how this podcast is equipping and inspiring you to become a sower of the gospel in the places where you live, work, learn, and play. Well, today I'm excited for you to hear a conversation that I had with Ashwin Ramani. Ashwin assumed the role of lead pastor of West Park Church in 2024. Raised in a Hindu family in India, he is the first in his family lineage to become a follower of Jesus. Since immigrating to Canada with his wife, Abali, in 2009, Ashwin has dedicated himself to ministering in a multi-ethnic context, driven by a deep desire to see people come to faith in Jesus Christ and draw closer in their walk with him. Prior to coming to London, Ashwin served on the pastoral staff team of Centre Street Church in Calgary for 13 years. In this conversation, Ashwin shares his profound journey from a Hindu upbringing in India to discovering Christianity and embracing a life of ministry in Canada. He discusses the challenges and insights gained through his experiences, including the establishment of the New Canadian Friendship Center at Centre Street Church, which aims to support newcomers and foster community. Ashwin emphasizes the importance of hospitality, understanding diverse cultures, and the church's role in reaching out to those who are different. He expresses excitement about the future of the church in Canada as it embraces diversity and lives out its mission. Well, friends, without further ado, here is my conversation with Ashwin Ramani. Well, Ashwin Ramani, a very special welcome to you to the Sowers Podcast.
It's good to be with you. Thank you for inviting me, Matt.
Ashwin, would you share with us how the gospel was sown into your life and how you came to know Jesus?
Yeah, I grew up in a Hindu family in the southern part of India, in a big city called Chennai, a city of 10 million people. And I grew up in a Brahmin family. I don't know if you're familiar with the caste system in Hinduism. It's quite popular. It's talked about a lot. So we were part of the uppermost caste called the Brahmins. And the caste system is connected to the occupation that you are with. Like traditionally, that's how it all originated, right? So the Brahmins were the priestly caste. So my ancestors would have served as priests in Hindu temple. So that was my upbringing in a very conservative Hindu family where we were taught some of the cultural and religious values. I still remember like a little room inside our home. We called it the puja room. And that's where you keep the Hindu idols. And so standing in front of that room every morning and saying my prayers, and I realized even as a young boy, right, I always had a hunger to know God. I wanted to know him more. So I would go to Hindu temples more than anybody else in my family. I just had that interest to know God at a deeper level. So there was a big turning point moment, like when I was 12 years old. I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And that really made me ask some of the deeper questions of life, right? Like, why did this happen to me? Why have I been singled out to suffer? Yeah, like 12 years old. At the time, the medical system in India was not the best. And so it was a rude transition into my teenage years, and
Right.
without the medical support and all of the help available, like taking insulin shots multiple times a day, struggling with fluctuating blood sugars. And so I really looked to Hinduism for answers, right? Like, why is this happening in my life? And the only answer I found was it's because of your karma, right? Something that you did in your previous life and you are paying for that. Like Hinduism believes in the cycle of reincarnations, and what you do in your previous life, if you do all of the bad things, you will have to pay for in this life through suffering. And so
Mm.
that was the reason for why I was going through what I was going through. And that really did not satisfy the questions that I had. It felt almost unfair, and I was disillusioned with Hinduism. Like, I didn't know what I did in my previous life, so why should I be singled out to suffer now? And so that led to a sense of like, oh man, my faith doesn't have the answers to some of these deeper questions that I am wrestling with in life. And then, I was a good student in school, so a lot of my energy was going towards like doing well in school, making it big in life. Those were all my dreams and ambitions. Until when I turned 18, I was doing my first year business degree in India. And that's a year in 2001 when the internet had just arrived. And all the young people, right, like my age, were all learning to use the internet, the different features that comes with it, emails and browsing. And
Hmm.
also, like at the time, what was popular was these chat rooms. Right? Yahoo used to have chat rooms where you can actually have real-time conversation with somebody from another part of the world. And that was so cool. Like, wow, I'm here in India. I can connect with somebody from somewhere else. I can have a conversation. And it's interestingly, right, like God in his providence led me to Christian chat rooms in Yahoo where followers of Christ from North America talked to me about Jesus. And that was very interesting as they explained to me about Jesus, what the gospel is, like that. The gospel seeds were sown in those conversations. And it
Wow.
also aroused curiosity in my mind. A Hindu mindset is very pluralistic, right? So one of the things when they highlighted, well, Jesus has the power to heal, right? That was something that I immediately took note of. Like, wow, like, so if I were to pray to a God like Jesus, would he heal me of my diabetes? Right? So that like I started praying. And then I realized, well, here I am praying to Jesus, but I don't know what Christians believe in. I've never been to a church, never seen a Bible, had zero understanding of the Christian faith. So let me start a little bit of an investigation of what Christians believe. And so that led to a few months of my research on my own. And at the time, right, like there was a book that was sent to me, that had stories of young people, real testimonies of young people who had walked away from home, who had made a mess of their life, who had done every possible wrong you can imagine. And yet, like, the book talked about how Jesus came into their life and brought a powerful transformation in them. Now, as a Hindu, as I was reading this, I could not relate necessarily with the experiences that they had gone through because, I lived technically a moral life. But what was fascinating was like the concept of a God, like, who does not punish people who do wrong. Like these people who had broken the family rules, were living in the streets, had done every conceivable wrong you can imagine, are not being judged. And instead, like it talks about the love of God, like God who cares for the lost, and that he takes a human form, would suffer and die on the cross to pay for the sins of people who had done all of these wrong. And that was a light bulb moment, honestly, right? Like, because the whole concept of grace that I heard for the very first time in my life It's like you don't do anything to earn God's favor or approval, but you receive it as a free gift, and which is
Wow.
exactly the opposite of karma. Karma is all about paying off your wrongs through your own self efforts and through your personal suffering. And here, the concept of grace, like that somebody else suffers in your place and you receive the benefit of that. And so, for a while, I wrestled in my heart. Here's karma and grace, like what describes the character of God, right? And the more I wrestled, it became evident in my own heart. And I was convinced if ever there is a God, like grace expresses his character. So that
Wow.
changed my life. Yeah.
So at that stage, did you receive Christ right away? I mean, this worldview is suddenly satisfying. It answers questions that Hinduism and their perspective of reincarnation, karma, are very unsatisfying. And so what happened next?
Yeah. I can't even recollect a moment where I surrendered my life and said, this is the day that I can pinpoint to. But I could say it was a season of about 3 to 6 months when all of this serious wrestling was happening in my heart, and God was really working in me. And like today I look back at that and I wonder, like, how did all that make sense in my mind? Because today when I talk to Hindus or people of other faiths, they have all these questions, and that was me, right, all those years ago. And yet at that moment everything really made sense. And so, yeah, even though I cannot pinpoint a day of my salvation, but just like all of a sudden I sense like I have faith in Christ. I place my life in his hands, and it became like an increasingly strong conviction that I'm not going to turn away from.
Wow. Can you share with us then the part of your story where you came to Canada? What was the motivating factor to come to Canada?
Yeah, I felt like a call for Christian ministry, even as a young Christian. Like I'm a firm believer in spiritual gifts because there was never a time that I thought I could do public speaking. When I was growing up in school, I was introverted because of diabetes and the things that I'd gone through. Like never really had a confidence to even stand up and speak before a class. But as a new Christian, right, like God placed the gift of preaching. Like so when I
Mm.
looked at others preaching, when I'm looking at TV preachers, like there's something stirring in my heart. Like that's something I want to do, right? So the little church that I was attending at the time in India, I talked to the pastor about it, and he said, like, why don't you share your testimony with the whole church? And that was like a big moment. Like, wow, I'm standing up before and speaking. And that experience, like I felt like I just came alive, right? And
Hmm.
something I think public speaking came naturally, and that was something God placed a gift in me, which I never had before. It was not a natural talent. And that helped me to ask like, God, what do you want me to do with my life, right? Like that's something like this one life is all I have, and I want to live it for God's purposes. And it became evident that God was calling me to vocational ministry. So when I finished my business degree, went to Bible college in India, I graduated, and then served in the northwestern part of India for about 3 years. And then after that time, right, there was a church in Canada called Center Street Church. That Center Street actually had a missionary couple that they supported who helped start the church that I was pastoring in India, even before I came.
Mhm.
And it's through their influence, right? The first mission team from Center Street Church came to that church when I was still serving as the pastor. And at that time, we were newly married, my wife and I felt like, I want to do my higher theological education. So when the mission team came from Canada, I asked them, like, what opportunities are there in Canada? And they told me about Ambrose Seminary in Calgary. It's run by the Christian Missionary Alliance. And so I decided to apply for my master's in divinity. And in 2009, my wife and I arrived in Calgary, Alberta.
Wow. And so you arrive in Calgary, Alberta. At that point, did you have an intention to go back to India after receiving your higher theological education? And then what was the process? Because you've stayed. So what was
Yeah,
the intent?
yeah.
And then how did God lead you to stay?
Yeah, I would say my original intent was that, I wanted to do my theological studies and go back to India. My heart was for India at the time, and I thought that was my responsibility. But it's interesting, as I came to Calgary, and you come with the notion, like this is true of a lot of people who live in the other part of the world, in the East. You think that the West is Christian. So if everybody who has a white skin, like is a follower of Jesus. Told that's why you're you assume, right? And when I came here, I realized that is just not right, right? So we here in Canada are living in a post-Christian West. Majority of people are not interested in God. The society has become very secular, and also I saw like the role of immigration, right? This whole movement of people groups, right, is no accident. Like it's not the governments that decide, like, oh, who we're going to allow and all that. Like God is behind the whole movement of people groups, behind the global immigration process, and He's doing a new work, right? He's bringing these numerous people groups to North America, and the mission field has arrived here, and the opportunity that we have now to make disciples of the nations, fulfill Matthew chapter 28 right in our own backyard without having to leave. So that was the reason, like I felt like God brought us to Canada for a purpose, and we've been prepared all along for a thriving cross-cultural ministry that we can engage in right here in the major Canadian cities. So that's the reason I decided to stay, and that's been the last 15 years of our life now in Canada. The joy of rubbing shoulders with people of diverse cultures and sharing the gospel, seeing lives being transformed. So that's been so enriching.
Talk to us a little bit about the ministry at Center Street Church. And when you first started there, as you surveyed the congregation, were there a lot of new Canadians in the congregation? And then I know that you started a ministry there. So tell us a little bit about that journey and that process.
Yeah, I came to Center Street Church, one of the largest churches in Canada. And when we came in 2009, it was already a very large church. And I would say it was not that demographically, if you look at it where it is now, I would say it was predominantly Caucasian at the time in 2009. But as time went by, like that started to change. As the city of Calgary changed, the demographics started to change. That was reflected soon within the church, right? And so that way, I talked to the leadership of Center Street about the possibility of a new ministry. What would it look like for Center Street to reach the newcomers that God is bringing to our city? Like, how can we be like a practical community center that'll offer programs and services that'll meet the felt needs of people? So as I presented that idea, there was a lot of interest at the time. The executive pastor at the time was Gordon Dirks, whose wife actually was a judge, in the city of Calgary, and she was involved in the immigration citizenship swearing ceremonies and so on. And so he was well versed with what was happening. So immediately said, yeah, you're spot on. Like, I think we got to capitalize on what God is doing in our city and partner with him in the work he's doing. So that resulted in birthing a new ministry called New Canadian Friendship Center. It was a ministry of Center Street Church. And we ran it like a community center with programs like English classes and all kinds of practical help, but mainly intended at building relationships. Because the government was offering a lot of programs and services as well. But what was missing was the personal connection. Like, nobody would sit down and ask, what's your story? Right? It's all about getting the program. Okay, you're done. Okay, next person, let's move to, right? My heart was like, let's sit down with them, and they all have a story. And so in the process, I would talk to people who've been doctors in Pakistan, but now driving taxi in Calgary. And as you have a conversation, you can see how hard it was on their pride. And then you can see even like tough looking guys just bawling, right, in front, and having this conversation, how much they were struggling, and they didn't want their family to go through what they were going through, and the adjustment was hard. So that's what made this a really meaningful ministry, where we extended friendship, and in that context of relationship, the gospel message was shared, and we saw a number of people come to faith as a result.
What would be your suggestions to those listening to this podcast on how to start something like the New Canadian Friendship Center? I imagine there is the actual starting of a program, but then there is also the shaping of a community, the people that are already in the church, to become the type of welcoming community where you can run these programs, but maybe the people in the program don't feel the type of welcome that you want them to into the church communities. How do you start something like that? And how do you begin to mold a culture to be a welcoming culture?
Yeah. I think the way I see it is the key to successful evangelism in the 21st century is the gift of hospitality. Like, how are we loving the stranger? that God is bringing our midst, right? Like if we really live out the teachings of Jesus, who's calling us to go where the lost people are, right? Like it starts by opening our circle of influence, right? Like most people have this small circle, and everybody in the circle looks just like us, talks just like us. But God wants us to broaden that circle and rub shoulders with people who are different from us. And that's, I think, is a heart transformation that only the Lord can bring, right? But it can be modeled, right? It's not something that's taught, but you got to live it in such a way where people see it, and it's like a spark that you're trying to create, and it spreads and becomes a flame. And I think it starts with a good intent more than anything else, right? Like the intent of like, I really want to care for the other person and genuinely show them the love of Jesus, right? So it's all bordering on relationships. Like we will all make mistakes in the process, right? Like we learn from our mistakes, and that's totally okay. But start with that intent, right? Like that you're going to love the other person with the love of Jesus, and let Christ lead us in that.
Friends, we'll get back to my interview with Ashwin Ramani in just a moment. Prior to that, however, I want to let you know about the brand new Alpha Youth series, which is a new way for young people to explore life, faith, and purpose. Made for this generation, the new series creatively unpacks the real questions young people have. The series, consisting of 10 episodes, run over 8 weeks, introduces and explores the core ideas of the Christian faith in a relevant and engaging way. What's new in this new series? 10 episodes run over 8 weeks. New, shorter episodes, 8 new Gen Z international hosts, new interviews, experts, and stories. It was created by youth, for youth, and it has translations in several languages. If you'd like to learn more about the brand new Alpha Youth series, you can visit alphacanada.org/Alpha Youth series. Once again, that is alphacanada.org/Alpha Youth series. And now back to my interview with Ashwin. So you talked about there was English classes, like an ESL class. What are some of the other programs that were part of this center?
Yeah, so we gave away free clothing as well. So all of the clothing donations from the church, we will set it up in a room, and people can come, and they need a winter jacket, they need toques, gloves, all of those things were available. We also offered knitting classes for women. Like a lot of women, what we found were staying home, where the husbands worked like 2 jobs. And many of them like were isolated and like living in a basement suite on their own. And so here, this place became a place where it's a safe place. People were friendly here. So they gathered. So that's another thing we did. We also had a cafe, basically a drop-in cafe. Like anybody can come and talk. And there's coffee, snacks available. Like we will help people fill out forms. Like many of them, because English was not their first language, had difficulty in filling some of these government forms and so on. So we would have our volunteers sit with them while they're having coffee, like help them out in practical ways. And then job interview skills as well. So some people from professional background in our church came and they looked at their resume, gave some practical tips of how it can be better, preparing them for interviews. Yeah, those were some of the things that we did. And they all serve to meet the felt needs of people.
What would you say, how do you help somebody? You know, sometimes when people enter into volunteering ministry, they think, I'm here to serve this other person. How do you teach people that you're inviting to come and serve to also be served? Because there are those that are maybe already have lived in Canada for some time, serving new Canadians. How do we help those folks understand that they can be loved and cared for and served? Because I know that also many new Canadians don't simply just want to be recipients, but they also want to be givers.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Even what we noticed as we started, serving people was they wanted to help in as well, right? Like, so when we had the clothing, like they wanted to help sort clothes, right? I think this is a change that we need in our churches too, because, church policy, we had this, like you need to be a follower of Christ in order to volunteer at Center Street Church. And that was something that was expected. And so what do you do now? You have these others, right? Like, hey, I want to help. Like, you guys are doing a great job. And so Muslims or Hindus, like they want to come alongside and do work with us, right? So
Right.
it was really a good stretching experience for our church as well at the time to actually wrestle and grapple with these things. So what does it mean for the person who is not a follower of Christ actually to help set items in our cafe, make coffee? Can they not do that? So I love seeing that healthy stretch, right? Even as our leadership realized, yeah, we got to change some of our policies in order to be able to accommodate, because one of the ways we can actually build relationship is by serving with others who are not followers of Christ. Now, there are some areas of ministry, obviously, you don't want non-Christians be serving in a teaching role, but there are other roles, I think, in a church where by all means you can allow them to be part of that community and offer them a sense of belonging, right? That's where it all starts. And so that I'm glad, Center Street had to go through those things whereby we became expanded in our understanding, in our worldview, and acceptance of others who are different from us.
I was recently talking to some of the leaders for my team, and my boss just returned from spending some time in Africa. And one of the leaders in Africa was talking about how different regions or parts of the world, similar to how David came with smooth stones and a sling to fight Goliath, each part of the world represents a different complement to other parts of the world in probably a broader worldview of truly understanding. What would you say are some of the strengths of those coming to Canada, that their perspectives become a complement to probably some of the complements of that we experience here in Canada and in the West?
Yeah, I think, in cultures, you talk about the warm culture and the cold culture, right? Like a lot of people coming from other parts of the world to Canada come from warm cultures where relationship is the key. They love hospitality. They love having conversation. They don't like living their individualistic, isolated lives, right? Like there's a healthy intergenerational emphasis there. So those are all great strengths people bring in. And I would also say, churches have to keep in mind, there are a lot of Christian immigrants who are coming as well, right? Yeah. So they are going to be your biggest asset in the church as you try to reach to a community that looks different from you and so on. The front line, you're going to have some of those Christian newcomers who have become part of your community. You need to empower them. Many times I feel like there is a sense of hesitation, right? Like in giving leadership roles to people of different backgrounds and so on. I think if we can create a foster culture of leadership development, right? Like where we are intentionally inviting people of diverse cultural backgrounds or believers, right, to serve. And in fact, it's so honoring to them when we can go to them and say, hey, you have something that we don't have. Like you can play this important role. I see this in you, right? That kind of forthright conversation will empower them to be able to start teaching, modeling, and serving alongside the rest.
What are some of the biggest barriers for somebody with a different religious background coming to Canada, in coming to understand the person of Jesus and coming to follow Christ?
Yeah, I think one thing I mentioned earlier was even though I was a Christian, I still had this misunderstanding, right? Majority of the West is Christian, right? Like you have this understanding that, oh, everybody who has a white skin is a follower of Jesus. And that is just not the case. It may seem something so simple, but the truth is, like a lot of Muslims that I've actually had conversation with had the same understanding. Like they thought like white skin is the same as Christian, right? And so they would make these assumptions like, so you all Christians drink, right? Don't you? Yeah, because, that's what we see in Hollywood, what they're doing, right? You all have this kind of lifestyle, right? Because that's what we see. And so they are very quick to assume things like that, right? So I actually had to correct our Muslim neighbors in Calgary, like, that is not true. Like, what you see on TV or what you experience, right? Just because you look at a pub and you see like a lot of people gathering there doesn't mean they all are Christian and we all drink. Like, in fact, I had to tell my Muslim neighbor who he was shocked when I said this. I said, I don't drink. He said, are you sure? You're Christian and you don't drink? I said, no, I don't. So it's like something simple as that, right? Like in correcting them and helping them to see the difference is important. Because when they come with that understanding, right? Like they don't have that high respect or regard for the Christian community because of these preconceived bias notions that they have come with. But when they actually get to know us at a deeper level, and the fact that we are genuinely caring, and that is something, again, I've heard over and over, people saying, why are you doing this? Like, we don't see anybody else doing this. Like, the fact that you care so much, and you are asking about the well-being of my family, and that is something that has a tremendous impact on their life. And one of my favorite memories is talking to an older lady at Center Street Church, right, who came to me. Her husband had just died, and she said, like, I don't know if I have any more purpose in life, right? Like, my husband passed away, but yet something is telling me that there's something still left for me to contribute. Like, so you're starting this new Canadian Friendship Center. Is there any way I can serve? Right? She said. And I said, by all means, like, you will be loved here. Like, a lot of them, these families have left their grandma and grandpas, and they've come. And so you will be their Canadian grandma. If you were to come, they would love you. And I just saw this person sitting in our cafe and just loved by all these kids, and the influence and the impact that she has had, right? She became one of our strongest volunteers who served and had such a powerful impact, on many non-Christian families. And she was like, and then even when we used to talk about it, and she always remembered that conversation, how hesitant she was at first, and then she took that step of faith outside of her comfort zone, saw God at work.
You then transitioned more recently to London, Ontario, and to West Park Church. Now that you've been in this role for a few months, what's getting you excited about ministry at West Park, and in particular, helping the church have a vision of what you've brought from Center Street and the community there?
Yeah, no, I'm really excited in this new role. It's just 6 months since I took over as lead pastor of a thriving, growing congregation. And what I see is, like, among the larger Canadian cities, like there are a lot of similarities. So London, Ontario is no different from Calgary in that sense. Plus, we also have with the Western University and the Fanshawe College. So huge student population. And a lot of them are international students who are coming from different parts of the world. So we got tremendous opportunities here to reach people of diverse cultures. And what I love about West Park is it is a multicultural church, right? Already we are multiple nationalities meeting together here. And so we are well equipped to reach a multicultural city, so that when people walk in here, like, nobody is going to feel like they are isolated or different. Like, they feel like as soon as they come here, they feel like they belong because of all this tones of skin colors that they see. And so that's what I'm excited about, helping our church to develop a missional culture, raise the value of evangelism, and in the context of relationship, how we can share the good news of Jesus and see people come to faith in Christ.
I want you to, if you would, speak to somebody, and I think that it's representative of every ethnicity and culture, that people traditionally, in the heart condition because of sin, can have fear of other ethnicities and cultures. Sometimes we in Canada will focus solely on white fear of immigrants coming to the country, but there is fear, I believe, in every ethnicity and racial people group of others that are different than them. How do you gospel someone's heart as it relates to fear of the other? And maybe even there's some racism in there.
Yeah, I think it's the doctrine of creation, right? Like, it's such an important fundamental doctrine for us because, God made all of us in his image, right? Irrespective of our cultures, skin colors, and so on, right? We're all made in his image. And therein comes the need to honor one another, respect one another in the midst of our differences, right? So that puts all of us on level ground, right? That's important that we keep in mind. And then you're right, like we all generally gravitate towards those who look like us, right? That is true of every majority of people groups, right? Like, we feel more comfortable in the midst of people who are just like us. And again, I think the gospel calls us to cross the borders. Yeah, the familiarity that we are used to, the comfort zone that we like to be in. And look at what we are celebrating now, this season of Christmas. takes that effort to bridge the gap, right? He is the one who takes the initiative to come down into this world. And if that's the message that we preach, then we have to live that out by taking that initiative to be the first person to extend that handshake, be the one to cross the street and talk to our neighbor, right? So that's where it all is lived out. The rubber hits the road. While our human natural tendencies to be with those who look like us, I think the gospel calls us to go outside of our comfort zone.
I'm wondering as well, Ashwin, if you could speak to the pastors, the leaders that might be listening, even a community member who's, they're surveying their city, they're surveying their neighborhood, just by watching what's going on around them, and they are seeing diversity.
Mm-hmm.
How would you counsel someone who is surveying this? How would you help them take the next step?
I would say, first of all, they need to recognize this diversity has not happened accidentally. God is behind this whole process. And when we can see God has gone ahead of us in this and He has created this environment for us, then it's a lot easier, right, to partner with what God is already doing. Right? If this is the work of God, then how can we foster that even more by coming alongside and partnering with the Holy Spirit in the work that He's excited about? I mean, heaven is going to be a multi-ethnic community, right? So when we see diversity here, that's what it's representing. It's a little visual here for us of what heaven is going to be like. So if we are praying, your kingdom come here on earth as it is in heaven, then we are looking at diverse society and saying, yeah, this is a glimpse of what we are all going to experience all through eternity, right? So I think that level of excitement and understanding removes the prejudices away from our hearts. And we realize God is doing this. So let me join hands with Him in the work that He is doing, right? Don't be fearful of it. Don't be skeptical or nervous about this, right? Rather see this as a work of God in which He's calling you to be co-laborers.
What are some resources that you would recommend connected to learning a little bit more about other cultures? And I don't want to overemphasize this point, because I think even as someone's thinking about sharing the gospel with someone, I think we all will say, oh, every person I'm going to have a spiritual conversation with is going to be a hardened, atheist or secular humanist, and they listen to Sam Harris every single week on his podcast. And my experience has been, actually, that's maybe 1 or 2% of the people you'll engage in spiritual conversation with. So I don't want to put too much emphasis upon resources or learning other worldviews, but have you found any helpful resources for people to begin the process of understanding, oh, this is what a Hindu believes, this is what a Muslim believes?
Yeah. I would say, there are some very basic things that we can do. Like one of the things I encourage people is go to an ethnic restaurant and have a meal. Right? It's as simple as that, because the cultural experience that you will have by just walking into an ethnic restaurant, going over the menu, having a conversation with where the person is waiting on you, all of that is just an incredible cross-cultural experience that you can have right where you are, right? Again, if you know of neighbors who are there in your block, right, it's intentionally taking the time to break the ice. Because what I find sometimes is like they're hesitant as well, right, just as you are. So if you were to break the ice first, and you will see how they reciprocate, right, to the gift of hospitality and so on, because that's the way their upbringing is, right? So when we are able to do that and show and model it, like they respond to that. Like one of the joys in Calgary was like my wife, who's really good in baking, would make these delicious food and then deliver it to our neighbors. And before you know, they started doing the same. So almost every evening, somebody will knock on our door and bring this food, right? Yeah. And I love that when that happens, right? Because by human nature, we're all wired for community. And so it is as simple as like looking for those people in your neighborhood and having a conversation, asking them stories about their home countries and what experiences they've had and so on, like honors them so much that they open up and they share when you're willing to listen.
One of my past guests on the podcast talked about how there is a mourner or a grieving person in every immigrant, every new person to the country, that there is a dynamic of loss.
Mm-hmm.
feeling of home. I was even just recently talking to some my American colleagues, and even, crossing the border back into the US, let's say
Yeah.
being in Canada, they immediately feel a sense of home in the same way that when I cross the border from the US back into Canada, or if I've been traveling somewhere else, there's almost this feeling of security and home. And so somebody coming new to the country of Canada, I'm sure is wrestling with that sense of home and safety and connection.
Mhm.
Could you share a little bit from your own experience of coming to Canada and some of the most meaningful moments when you and your wife first arrived in Calgary?
Yeah. You're right. Like there is that aspect of grieving because you're leaving so much behind, right? Your immediate family, your friends, the things that you're familiar with, and you come to a new place. And what I also find fascinating is people come with high expectations as they come to Canada because, this is
Mm,
what they've seen in the movies. This is what they've seen in the photos. And they come thinking that, wow, we finally made it, right? Like, because
yeah.
it's a long process. They come with great expectation. And all of a sudden, like it with any human experience, right? You live it, you're in awe of it for a moment. And then is this all there is?
Yeah.
So they go through that as well, right? Like, did I leave all of this behind for this? Like, look at it. Like, it's snowing, it's minus 20. And like, what have I done, right? Like, they freak out, right? So it's interesting to see all of those emotions come forward, right? And I think deep inside, they long for people that they can be close with. What I find in Canada, and what even I found, my wife and I, is how isolated we are. And it is very difficult to make friends in this culture. So my neighbors in Calgary, when we were living, were from Bangladesh. And so they said, we have no friends, no family, no friends. And they had a boy who was the same age as our oldest. And so it was his birthday party. And they had nobody else to invite other than our family. And so it was just heartbreaking, actually, to see like how the living lives like that in isolation, without help,
Mm,
without support. Like I've had conversations with parents, like when they're going to have a baby, they don't know who to leave the other siblings with when they go to the hospital. Like simple things like that, right? Like that you take for granted. Like they have no trustworthy person that they know of, that they can leave their child in the middle of the night so they can now go to the hospital to deliver the baby. So I see like the struggles, the challenges that come with it, and not able to find the connections that they're looking for. And that's all the more is the reason why I think we as Christians should be modeling this and be that the Canadian aunt, Canadian uncle, the Canadian grandma and grandpa, and be there for people and extending our own table, right? And including those who are new as part of our dining table, right? Yeah, amazing ministry can happen, right, when we are willing to do that.
Just in closing, Ashwin, what are you excited about as you think about the future of the church in Canada?
I'm excited that, God is at work all around us. As I mentioned, like God is bringing the people groups here, and churches are recognizing now, like, we cannot just be within our four walls. We need to live missionally. We need to embrace the differences that are all around us and how we can meaningfully interact and learn to engage with the community around. And the more churches are receiving that vision and they're stepping out by faith, and as they're doing that, I see results all around of people embracing the gospel, being discipled, and life change and life transformation as a result. And that's what keeps me going, right? Like I believe that's one of the reasons why God brought us here. And so we want to equip others in order to live a mission lifestyle and reach our multicultural city.
Ashwin, thank you for taking the time and being part of the Sowers podcast.
It's great to be with you, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Friends, I'm sure you would agree with me that there was so much from this conversation with Ashwin Ramani that could be applied as this episode's action step. The thing that I want to focus on, however, is going back to the story that this whole episode began with, which was of the woman who lost her husband and was asking the question, what is the purpose for my life? What can I be about now? And Pastor Ashwin talked about how in conversation with her, he said, well, why don't you come and volunteer at the New Canadian Canadian Friendship Center, that these new people to our country will see you as their Canadian grandma, and you can love on them, care for them. You know, I've had the opportunity over the last couple of years to grow in relationship with people that are new to our country, coming here, many missionaries coming to our country to plant churches, others coming to our country seeking asylum. And I am just so overwhelmed with gratitude for how God is bringing the nations to literally our doorsteps. And many people moving here, as we talked about over the course of this podcast, over the number of years, come here and don't know anyone. And many of them are grieving the loss of culture, of home. And we have the opportunity for those that are here to welcome them, to be the new family to them, especially from cultures that are far more warm rather than cold, as Pastor Ashwin talked about. And so what I want to invite you to do is to do a little bit of research into your area, into your city, as far as where are new Canadians spending time. Maybe there's an organization that you can volunteer with, or if you see somebody at a grocery store or somewhere else who may appear as if they are new to the country, don't assume that, don't stereotype people, but be aware as you're going about the city, as you are taking notice of what's going on around you, listen in, and if you can offer a helping hand, please take the opportunity to do so and to love somebody that's new to the country. The opportunities are incredible to love someone. Thanks again, as always, for joining us for this episode. I hope you were encouraged, equipped, and inspired to become a sower of the gospel in the places where you live, work, learn, and play. I'm now going to leave you with a clip from the episode that will be released next with Chris Demonier from the Village Church in Surrey, British Columbia, and which has sites all across the country.
You have cows, okay? And the cows need to drink. Now, you can keep the cows at bay through a fence where it's like, hey, all the cows are grouped together because there's a fence that they keep the herd in. Or you can put a water source in the middle and the cows will stay close because of that water source. And I like to think of myself as a leader who's amongst his people and just keeps saying, here's where the water is. This is the water of life. Jesus is the source. And so it's like, I'm not trying to win people over by religious structure in the church, organizational structure in the church, processes. I'm trying to show them who Christ is and why he's valuable and have that be the center that changes their life, because then it's him, not me.